Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Kane Audio vlog. This time I have moved and I'm in the temporary back room of the house. So for the next, I don't know, 3 to 6 months or so, at least, I'm going to be in this room. So hopefully the sound quality isn't too different. I've literally just sort of started unpacking stuff, so I don't have any lighting or anything like that, but I have been seeing questions coming through for my Ask Me Anything series, so I'm just going to crack straight on with it. House admin, I don't know if there is any at this point because everything's just been chaos. Can't think of anything. No. So, yeah, let's just crack straight on with it. Right, first question. Casey Music. Hey Dom, hi. You were missing about my reference to the keyword once again. Yeah, I purposely do that just so that no one really knows what it's about. Okay, since there is no one this week, I have only one question. What do you think is the best way to get approval about whether your music is good enough to be submitted to a label or not? I mean, for example, you can send your SoundCloud demos to Julian Gray to review them. Big thanks to him, by the way, to do this. But what do you think is the best way for your music to get reviewed without paying and, more importantly, without bothering professionals? That's a good question. I think bothering your friends first is probably a big thing. I would say you're probably better off bothering your circle of friends to begin, and just get people to sort of tell you. And when I say friends, I don't mean social friends, I mean music friends. Get them to tell you anything that could be better or whatever. And I don't know if there's really a middle ground between that and record labels, really. I think you're probably better off just submitting your music to record labels if you think it's ready. If you think that, for example, let's say you have a favourite artist of a similar style of music, and you play your track and their track next to each other and mix one to the other, and you think they both sound equally as good or as close as you can get, then you're probably in a position to start submitting to record labels. I would say when it comes to starting off with record labels, I think you're probably better off starting with smaller, lesser known labels. But a good way of doing that is go on somewhere like Beatport, and find your genre of music, whatever that is, and look at maybe the top 100 or something. Have a look at what labels keep coming up in the top 100, because they're obviously the ones that are doing something right. And I guess try and find one of those that the name keeps coming up, and it's your kind of music, because of course it's pointless. I when I used to run a record label, I used to get demos from people, and the music would be nothing like what we released. So we focused on sort of my sort of music, the middle ground between house and techno and progressive. And we'd get demos through from people that were submitting drum and bass or something, and you just sort of think, or even rock bands, and you just sort of think, well, you haven't even listened to the label's music. You're clearly just spamming people. So I think in this day and age, you've got to be kind of careful of that you don't want to be seen to be spamming people. And I think that's quite important. So look up the label, get to know their music, get to know their artists, get to know what kind of a vibe that label goes for, and I think the most important thing I could ever say in terms of getting signed is take your time. Don't expect, don't expect to get signed to the world's biggest record label overnight. It's not going to happen like that. No record label looks for an unknown. They look for known artists, and you've got to build a history with that. So I think that's pretty important, that, and when you are dealing with bigger labels, if you look at Mau5trap, for example, if I sent them an EP today that they absolutely loved and they wanted to sign it there and then, in all reality, contracts wouldn't be done until, minimum couple of weeks, I guess, and maybe up to a couple of months. When it comes to release date, they want to put in some groundwork, get the promo running. I want to get in more promo work, whether it be some sort of competitions or a new take on some artwork or some videos, or there's something I want to do as an artist to sort of get to that release date. I want to be able to speak to magazines, to blogs, to websites, to whoever. There's a lot of work involved in getting a successful release. So the labels are they've got to be pretty careful about how they sign and how quickly they sign things. So take your time. That's probably the best advice. Yeah, I would say with labels you've not spoken to before, don't just send them your track. Ask them, do they want Dropbox? Do they want WeTransfer? Do they want SoundCloud links? Do they need it to be private links? Some labels care, some labels don't care. But at least you then get a reply and a conversation, and you can start talking to them and they can get to know you. And I think that's pretty important. As for getting reviews done, I'm a pro on audio.net. There's, I'm sure, other websites out there as well, and they're all paid services. While I think some people might begrudge spending money on these things, for me personally, as a professional, I have a day job doing music. I don't have enough time to do all these things for free. Otherwise I'd never be able to eat. So really it's kind of the only way that somebody can get my full attention and get me to really write some concise feedback and to really sort of talk about it. So I think these things they're there for a reason, and I think it's a good reason. I know full well that if these sites like Audio were around when I started, I would have jumped at the chance, because as you're saying, it's obviously difficult to get people to listen to music, or certainly the right people. So there we go. By the way, I think everyone who is participating in the comment section of this AMA can't thank you enough for what you're doing. The way you act and get in contact with your community regularly is kind of role model-y for me. Thank you so much for doing this so regularly. You're welcome. Ironically, I took last week off, but I think, as you can see by the state of this place, that's not undue. So you're welcome. I think it's pretty important that we all sort of support each other. Really, I think that's our jobs as musicians. It's a big industry now, and there's lots of little pockets around the place, and I think it's important we sort of stay focused on why we got into it in the first place, really. Sunset 86, I can see there are 4 questions here. I was thinking this was going to be a quick one. Hi Dom, thanks for your response. These AMAs are so helpful. By the way, in regards to my question last week about buying analog synths, I did mean real hardware analog as opposed to VA. I'm looking at getting a Korg Minilog as a starter analog synth. Anyway, I do have a couple of questions if you have time to answer. I've heard, I think I probably said last week, I've got a mate who has the Minilog, and I've sort of dabbled a bit now, and yeah, it is a great synth. I think it's probably a good starter synth because the price is great as well. Number one, have you written a book about mixing? If not, when? You know, I was half approached by someone to write a book a few years ago, and I thought about it, and then I thought, I'm not sure if I'm there yet in my life or career, more importantly. But it's definitely on the table. I think it's an option. I quite like the idea of doing it, but I think it's quite tricky because I think I need to come up with an angle for it first. When you're talking about mix engineering, it can be quite easy to just get lost in tiny details, and if you're writing a book, you don't know the person reading the book. I think, you know, even with these vlogs, for example, I kind of have a rough idea of what you guys know and don't know, and so I kind of feel a bit more comfortable that, you know, these are just, and they're free videos, you're not paying for them, so, you know, it's just something that I can do, and because it's free, if it's shit, I can say tough. Whereas with a book, if somebody's paying money for a book on mixing, I don't know whether they are absolute beginners or whether they're just looking for a couple of tiny tips, or I don't know how technical they want me to go into. So there's a lot to think about in that, but it is something I have thought about and will probably think about again in the future. Question 2, do you prefer to mix certain genres of electronic music, or are you open to mixing anything? Pretty much anything. I think, if I'm completely honest, my strengths are in electronic music. I have done some folk, some rock, some opera, some classical, so I've done a bit of everything, but I know my strengths are definitely in electronic as a whole. But I like sort of something that branches out. I like, so for example, I did one, I think I might have mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, I did it a month or so ago. There was a track that was kind of synthwave 80s influenced, but still modern electronic, and the client wanted the drums and the kicks in particular to have a really sort of pumping feel to them, like the 80s thing, but more of a sort of 808 feel to it with a modern twist. And he was quite specific in how he wanted it to sound as a final mix. So this is a regular client, so when he was producing it, he was sending me clips and going, are you going to be able to make this sound like this? And he'd send a reference track, and he was sort of talking about, I want the kick drums in my track to sound like this, and he'll send the reference and I'll listen to it and I'll be like, okay, well, I think you need to get I can't remember what it actually was, but I would have said something like, I think you need a sharper transient or a louder transient or something in these kicks, or you know, sometimes in a scenario like that I might say, do you mind if I redo the kicks and redesign them myself? In this instance, he'd got some kicks that were fairly close, so I knew I could just sort of take it with various different compression techniques. In fact, talking about doing mix videos, I might try and dig that track out and speak to the client and ask if I can do it publicly for this video series, which might be quite a good one to do. So yeah, so that was a really fun project, and I enjoy the challenge of things like that. As for genres, I don't think I have a particular favourite. I think generally most electronic music has a similar sort of demand in there. So yeah. 3, please make another mixdown tutorial. Well, I've just mentioned that actually. Yeah, I'm definitely going to do it. The difficulty is I need permission from the artist, I need permission from the record label and any copyrights holders, because if I'm publishing it on YouTube and I'm playing clips of the track, then I need to get copyright clearance for all of that. And not only that, it needs to be a mix where the customers may be at least happy for the pre-mixed down elements to be played publicly. And then not only that, it needs to have, I think, enough work for me to be able to say, right, you know, here's what I did. You know, you do get some mixdowns where it's 90% there, and in which case, you know, the video's only going to be showing me maybe changing the levels of a couple of bits and pieces, and that's probably not going to be too interesting. Question 4. Yeah. Are you a mentor, or do you ever teach people one-on-one? I don't generally, but there's no real reason for that. I think it's something I've always been open to, but at the same time, if I'm 100% honest with you, I'm kind of scared of it as well, because what I don't want is somebody to pay money to sit down with me and then us sort of sit there going, I don't know what to do, or even worse, me thinking I'm doing a great job and the client coming away at the end of the day thinking, well, I didn't learn anything there. And I think, you know, that would be a waste of his money and our time, or her money and our time. So I think it's something I'm open to, but I think I would probably need to be given some sort of a brief. So I think it needs to be quite specific. So if someone, for example, really needed to hone in on, let's say, the mixdown skills, or the sound design of something in their track, or, you know, if I think, you know, the client needs to know their weakness before they come to me, really. Otherwise it can all get very vague, and that's a difficult thing for me to sort of pen into the diary, going, right, well, we'll book this date and do something. So yeah, hopefully that answer wasn't too vague. Thanks in advance for answering these questions. Hope your move is going well, and get a new studio set up ASAP. Thank you very much. You're welcome. Yeah, the move is going fairly well. I mean, I can film this video, that's a start. I've sort of cut down on some of the projects I'm working on at the moment so that I can actually get everything done. I've still got, what you can't see off camera is a load of unpacking to do. And that's pretty tricky, especially when we're in the middle of a heat wave. But it's going well, thanks. Scene Magoof. I saw you had credits on your site for Phineas and Ferb. What exactly did you do on that show? So that is... okay, so funnily enough, we mentioned in the last video we were talking about ASCAP and PRS. I'm sure you've not done this on purpose, and I've certainly not meant to mislead anyone, but you've said the word credits, and just to be clear, I'm not credited on Phineas and Ferb. My music was used or synchronized to Phineas and Ferb. I haven't even heard it myself. I don't even know what episode it was. But yeah, just to clarify that, I didn't want to mislead anyone. But yeah, my music has appeared on Phineas and Ferb, and that's shown up in my royalty statements. So as to what exactly did you do on that show, not a lot. Well, nothing really, because I wrote the music and I published it through a company which was registered on PRS and ASCAP and all those, and this company provide libraries of music to animators and film studios, and then if they want to use that music in a portion of the program, then they basically come back to that company and say, right, we want to use this track, we're using 30 seconds, and they go, right, okay, here's a contract, and it's all done. So in terms of my part, I kind of did nothing really. You know, all I did was write the music and on behalf of the company. So it wasn't a specific brief on that one. However, I do music for other companies who pitch for adverts, for example, and with those you'll have a very specific brief. In fact, some of them can be bonkers briefs. I had one once that said, it was obviously written by marketing people and not music people, and the brief said something like, we're thinking purples, we're thinking clouds, we're thinking soft grass, and something else, and that's basically what they wanted their music to represent. So sometimes you'll get a brief that you just think, I have no idea what they want here. So yeah, so it can be a bit of a weird one. Next, Mitch Brown. Hi Dom, enjoy the vlogs. Cool. How do you get your music considered for TV, etc.? Any tips or recommendations? So I kind of just started going into that. So there are lots of companies out there online. I'm not going to mention names because I'm about to slag them off, but I can assure you there are lots of companies out there that claim to get you syncs onto TV. Whilst they may well do that, I think it's more by luck than judgment. Sorry, I haven't silenced my phone. I think it's more by luck than judgment, and I think you need to be careful of those companies that don't give you any money and don't guarantee anything. So there are lots of online companies that claim to be libraries, and they claim to have had music put on X, Y, and Z TV shows that sound great. And that may well be true, that I'm not saying they're lying. But what you need to be careful of is they might have 10,000 other musicians submitting the same music as you. So, you know, you've got a 1 in 10,000 chance of anything actually being signed. So it's not always a good deal. However, there are other companies, ones that I probably can mention that I've worked for. So, for example, Sonogram London, obviously Universal with their UPPM sector. There's another company back in Cardiff called Clearwave. You know, there's loads of companies that I've written music for. Some of them pay a demo fee, some of them don't, but you need to work out which ones work for you and which ones don't. It's only ever a small amount of money for the demo fee anyway, but you then basically own half the copyright, or generally, some companies are slightly different, but generally you own sort of half the copyright and they own half the copyright for publishing. So if, for example, it gets put on a TV show, then you get royalties for that. And it's kind of a weird area because it's a bit of a niche area, I suppose. It's very difficult to get into. I've got to admit, I got into it more by luck than judgment, because a friend of mine had a friend of his who worked for one of these companies and had worked his way up to becoming a producer, and he had a big project come on and he needed to get in some extra people for it, so he roped my mate into it, and my mate rang me up and said, can you join me because I need help in the production of it? So I did, and then I got talking, and you know, and you know what, I think this is probably vital to what we were saying earlier about record labels and TV stuff and all of this. I can't tell you enough how important it is to keep friends in the industry. If you meet nice people, stay in touch. Obviously, if you meet dickheads, don't stay in touch. But, you know, I think this is something that we all need to learn a bit quicker, really, is that, you know, it's nice to be nice, and sometimes it comes back in dividends. So it's kind of a tricky industry to get into for TV stuff. You know, you could approach, for example, ad agencies, but if I'm totally honest, you know, most ad agencies either have their own in-house teams who do music, or they have enough composers and writers that they can get the jobs done. So it's kind of tricky one to get into. It's not, it's a bit of a closed door, I suppose. And like I say, I was lucky enough that, you know, I got introduced to a friend of a friend who needed some help on a project, which I got in on, and then once I got in on that project did very well, and you know, that sort of introduced me to the company, and then they started asking me for a few more. And then once you've got a bit of a history out there, then you can approach other companies and say, well, I've done this, and here's my track record or my show reel, or, you know, here's a bunch of TV shows my music's been on, and in which case they're going to be a bit more interested. So again, going back to the record label thing, it's very similar, where, you know, if you want to approach a big record label, let's say Mau5trap, for example, you know, if you approach them saying, I've got a demo, it's a great track, and it could be the best track on earth, but if you've never released anything through anyone before, what are you doing? What are you saying that Mau5trap are going to be really interested in? You know, if you don't have that history behind you, that track record, then it's very difficult for Mau5trap to judge anything. So, you know, I think that's important, is if you want to make a success in this industry, you've got to be prepared for a long journey. It can take a long time. So I'm sorry that couldn't be more specific, but hopefully that helps. Kavoke, really enjoyed that. Cheers. Thanks for answering my question. Good insight into the adaptive game stuff, which I find fascinating but somewhat daunting. You and me both. I hope Christian Henson's videos are useful for your studio build. I find him quite entertaining. I forgot about that. Thanks for reminding me. I will look into his videos in about 4 minutes time, because I think that is all of the questions. Let me just double check I haven't missed anything. Yeah, no, that's it. Cool. So we have kept it under half an hour, which means my camera won't switch off straight away. So once again, thank you very much for listening. Apologies for being in the back room, but there's not much choice about that. Moving forward with that, I'm sort of trying to work out what's realistic and what isn't. I think, if I'm totally honest with myself, I probably won't have finished the designs and narrowing it down how I'm going to build a studio, because the plan is I'm going to build one in the garden, and I need to figure out a lot of stuff out there, so it's not going to be straightforward, but hopefully, I don't know what the sound quality is going to be like in here. This is literally the first thing I've done from starting to unpack and just get my computer set up with a pair of speakers. So I've no idea what it's going to sound like, but hopefully it's not too horrendous. Yeah, so thanks for making it this far into the video once again. If you have made it this far into the video, then comment the word Manchester, since that's where I am now. Yeah, so thanks again for listening, and hopefully I'll be back again this time next week, and I will see you there. Cheers.